cut my life into pieces. This is my last resort. Ah! Oh, sorry. Well, let me tell you a story. Tell you a story about these drums. These drums and I been around a while. I'm Lemuel Hayes. At the time when we made this pack, I was the manager of Nelson Drum Shop, and since then I've stepped away, but I'm still working here, still doing stuff. I've known Bryson for a long time. I met him whenever it was still just out of his house. I bought a partial set of Rogers drums from him, and I had earlier, like maybe 2 weeks before that, I had met another drummer in town and traded him this 6.5 by 15 white marine pearl, and had a very particular extra hole that was kind of random, which was fun. And I traded him that for a Superphonic because I just needed a Superphonic more than I needed that other drum at the time. And when I went to go buy these Rogers drums from Bryson, I saw that he had traded that drum to Bryson, which was just entertaining. And it gave a good conversation point to just for Bryson and I to have a rapport and talk about drums. And at the time, I had all these drums because me and a couple of friends who also had a lot of vintage drums, we were doing a vintage backline thing, and you know, it was too many drums for us to all own and hang on to, and it didn't really pan out the way that we thought it was going to, so I ended up liquidating a lot of mine, which is how Bryson and I came back around. I had a lot of drums on Craigslist, and he reached out to me after the first week being open on McFerrin, and he had sold pretty much all the drums he had, and asked me if I'd want to consign the drums. And so I just took them all over there, and I went back, I think a couple of weeks later, and he asked me if I'd ever be down to cover the store if he needed a day off. And that's the story of how I started working here. And it's been on again, off again in terms of just if I've been on the road or not, but he's built a great place, and it's a pleasure to work with him and be here, and he's a great friend. And it was fun to do something very outside of the normal Nelson thing with this sample pack, so that was a lot of fun. These are my 50s Gretsch broadcasters. It's a funny story because I got them, didn't know what they were. I knew they were Gretches, but the guy that I bought them from was a friend of, it was a cousin of a friend. And I bought a bunch of drums because he and his family were moving abroad, and he was like, oh, I've got these Gretsch drums, man. And so I bought this and with some snare drums and some other stuff just to help him clear out, and I was just gonna make some extra money. And I sold the snare drum at the store, the very first Nelson, over the little tiny one. That was early on when it was just Bryson. And I was just gonna sell the drums. I thought they were 60s round badges, and at the time I had another set of those and I didn't need another one. So I put them on Facebook Marketplace. I took really bad photos in my living room, and a guy wanted to see a photo of the edges, and then I took the heads off because they had coated heads all the way around. And I saw they were 3-ply broadcasters, and I deleted the listing. But they were rough. The wrap on, they were originally midnight blue, and the floor tom wrap was held on with a Marshall amplifier sticker across the seam. It also had a chunk about the size of Asia on your standard 7th grade world geography map missing. So I had these rewrapped, but everything else is pretty original. The T-rods aren't. The hoops are the original nickel over brass stick choppers like the 302s are modeled after, although these aren't that thick. Yeah, it sounds great. It's like a Ludwig and a Gretsch had a baby, like your 60s Ludwig and 60s Gretsch had a baby, because it's a little fatter, but it's thicker than a round badge shell too. It's 3-ply, maple, poplar, maple, classic combination. Yeah, I've used these drums a lot. I took them on the road a few times. Now they mostly stay at home and live their recording life. But whenever we were coming up with all this for the shop pack, we had a master list of everyone's drums, and we were trying to do like a decade thing. And I was the only one with a 50s kit. So here I am, kit number 2, the 1950s. But yeah, these drums have a really round edge. It's like straight on the inside, curves from the outside. So it's a bizarre edge, really. The only other drums that have that are the 60s round badges, which are a thinner shell, and the CNC player dates. The bass drum and snare drums don't have that though. They have like a normal sharp edge. So, you know, Gretch. It all makes sense until it doesn't. But yeah, man, I love these drums. They can cover a lot of ground, and we had them tuned pretty high because, you know, it's how we tuned stuff back in the 50s. And it was just a good time for Gretsch. It would ultimately become, you know, set the foundation for the round badge renaissance in the 60s, where that was like the sound of jazz and other music. But yeah, I love all these. So since I was the 50s thing, we were trying to decide all this. Should we play 50s stuff, 60s stuff, whatever we're doing? I found this like a playlist of every number one from the 50s. And on the weeks leading up to it, all I did was listen to that. And every once in a while there was a surprise, but there were a lot of the same grooves in that era, unless it was jazz. So a lot of 6/8 kind of feel, which was fun. And there were, every once in a while, there was some very interesting groove, but it was still, you know, the 2 and 4 was still in its infancy. But it was interesting to hear, you know, these guys playing these drums, and they're just cranked and they're just ripping on them. And it's all jazz fills. It's just very fun to listen to and hear it all in the context, and then take it out of that context and record it in a modern studio with modern microphones and not just like one mic in a room. It's a very alien thing to hear the drums tuned and played and from an era like that, and then recorded like we would today. You can really hear how different they approached drums then in terms of tuning and all that. Hopefully you enjoyed me playing 50s grooves and then trying to play modern grooves on drums that are tuned way too high, which was also weirder than you would think. Like, let's play some rock grooves on drums tuned just dummy high. And you're used to sinking into them, and then they just don't. So that was a lot of fun. But the one-shots and doing the loops, it's a fun experiment to really get to see how different even your own drums sound. You know, I brought all these drums that are all over the place in terms of age and material and quality and quantity. And you have all these just totally different sounds, same setting, same everything. And, you know, we always think about that, but they're the drums you know, and rarely are you pulling so many of them out in the same session. And it was a lot of fun to hear it that way. And then to hear the drums of your buddies that you normally hear them, like you hear them recorded when they recorded it on something, or live at the gig or whatever. And it was just really fun to be able to compare and contrast in this kind of very controlled setting in that way. In terms of getting old drums ready to record, you have to do some stuff that you wouldn't necessarily think about for a new drum. If we're gonna get really technical, you know, your modern lug is going to have, it'll still be the same shape, and it will still have the tiny little lug insert, which is what the tension rod actually screws into. But today they're mostly held in with these rubber or plastic spacers inside that holds the lug insert in place. But back then, plastic wasn't anywhere near the ever-present thing in our lives. So they used springs to hold the lug insert in place. And, you know, when you're recording in Sun Studio in the 50s and you are being recorded with one mic in the center of the room and you're hitting hard and you're 10 feet away from the mic, you're not going to hear those springs rattle. But when you set up at an incredibly nice studio here in East Nashville that has a ton of condenser microphones all around you, and you hit a bass drum, which tends to always be the main culprit, you'll just hear those little springs whine. So I went through this entire kit and made sure I put cotton balls in. You do what's called stuffing the lugs. There are some other methods. Cotton balls are usually the easiest and most commonly used method, but you basically just stuff a cotton ball in the lug and then put it back on, and the drum holds the cotton ball in place, and the cotton ball dampens the spring from resonating, so you don't get that whine. But that's the number one thing you have to do with pretty much any vintage drum that you're going to record, if it doesn't have tube lugs. Other than that, I went through and made sure all the bearing edges were pretty clean. On this one, I didn't have to do any kind of like sandpaper action, just something super fine to take off anything. I did wipe all the edges with a dry like microfiber cloth just to make that. And then you have to be really meticulous when you're tuning this stuff and making a sample pack, because you want it to be consistent, you want it to be quality, you don't want there to be any weird tone. Some vintage drums are more forgiving, some are not. These drums, because they're actually pretty light, and I have ambassadors on them, coated on the top, clear on the bottom, on the toms at least, you gotta really make sure it's all tuned to the same note, or the same pitch, however you want to think about it, so that you have a consistent thing over and over as you're doing all these. You're not all of a sudden having a tom that's going to drop down or to be way lower all of a sudden. And then other than that, you just want to go around and make sure nothing rattles. These leg mounts on Gretches can be a little notorious for that, but I got them in a good place, and just make sure nothing else is rattling. Check all the bolts, all the screws, because they're old and that happens. It is a little bit of a prep process, for lack of a better way to put it. You're gonna record one day, but you're gonna spend probably an entire week. I think at the time I was watching the X-Files straight through, so I just took the drums apart, just put all the things in there, and it took a few hours. I did some snare drums and some other kits at the same time, but it's a tedious process, but it's a good one. Also, I normally play this drum with some dampening in it, and there is a version of that in the one-shots where we have the dampening that I use because Johnny loved it. But then we did take it out for the rest of the recording of all the other loops. So there should be one-shots of that, which the one-shots are a whole other thing. The hardest part about the one-shots is when you're doing them and you've got, especially the dynamic levels when you do those, because you're doing them across snare drums. And each snare drum, I mean, especially, we'll get into the different ones, but some of them are very quiet, some of them are very loud. So when you're thinking about what is your 1 dynamic versus what is your 10 dynamic, and keeping that relative is a very tedious process, not only when you're doing it per drum and you're doing multiple takes of that, but you're having to stack it and keep in mind like, okay, yeah, I hit that one this hard, I should hit this one that hard, so that it's like consistent. And then you want to make sure that your jumps up are the same. You know, we don't have a do, re, mi for these dynamic levels. It's just, you got to find what that is in your brain with your muscle memory to try to dial in that thing. And if you were just doing them all the ones and then all the twos and then all the threes, it would be one thing. But to do them all and kind of have to remember that and keep track of it, it's not a way you normally do things. So it's a little different. I found the bass drum one, for whatever reason, for me to be the most challenging. I think that I just kind of have like 3 gears and I needed more than that, which was fine. But it was something, it's just, you know, a new challenge. So yeah, the one-shots, they're fun and they're useful. So when I'm trying to tune these drums are, while they do have a pretty fat edge, since it terminates in that just cliff, it makes it pretty finicky. I do find that other drums I have are easier to tune than these, and that's just a combination of factors. It's probably all those things we talked about, the edge, the weight, the heads, and the type of hoops and all that stuff. But my general method for doing, let's say, a tom is you always want to tune in a star pattern, but let's say I put fresh head on it, I'm going to bring it up to just finger tight. I use drum keys that have a knob on the top so you can spin it, and I get it finger tight all the way around. And then from there, I bring it up usually about a full turn or a half turn increment to start with until there's just some tone. And then what I'm trying to do is I'm trying to match the pitch of the head to the resonant pitch of the shell, if I'm just trying to get like a medium place, or if I don't know a drum, like someone brings in a drum, or I'm using backline or whatever, I bring it to a medium place, which for me is having the top head be with the shell and the bottom head be with the shell. Even if they're different heads, it's just gonna be affected by the tension to get there. And that should give you the longest possible note. And then from there, I personally find it's easier to make adjustments. So if you're doing a jazz gig, you can bring it up obviously, or for this case, I brought these up because it's just more of that sound. But if it was me doing like a country thing, I would bring the top down evenly, probably about a quarter turn or so. The lug count on the drum makes a big difference in terms of how much adjustment you're doing for each thing. Because if it's like a 10 lug snare drum and you just do an eighth of a turn or a little nudge, and you do that consistent nudge all the way around, it's gonna actually bring the drum up pretty significantly. Whereas if it's a 6 lug drum, that's not gonna be anywhere near as much. So generally I start there. If it were me tuning these drums for any regular gig, I would tune them to that, and then I would probably bring the top down slightly or the bottom up, just depending on the drum. For a live thing, that tends to make it speak a little quicker, get out of the way a little quicker, however you want to think about it. And then I don't find that in most, especially live settings, you don't need that really long note. Now, if I am doing something with that, I'll leave them in that middle zone. I believe I also have cotton balls just in the drum. There's probably like 4 in this one and something around 6 or so in this one. And that just helps function as a physical gate. Like you hit the drum and it vibrates and they raise up with the air current moving in the drum. And then they are so light that they settle on the head, and that just keeps some of the weird overtones on the bottom from being problematic, and it shortens the note length just enough, but it's not, the drum still sounds very alive. Has a very long note still. It just sort of gives it a more even decay. Now, if we're doing a snare drum or a bass drum, you know, if you're muffling the bass drum, then you would I do a slightly different thing. If it was like what we did for this, I tune it just like I would a tom. I bring both sides up and, you know, it just let it ring, let it sing. In the case of when you've got some dampening in it, you can do that too, but it sometimes makes the drum sound funny. You've got to have the right amount of dampening if you're going to have a lot of tension still on the head. So I tend to run a pretty loose kick batter and a slightly tighter, and that always depends on like what I'm doing and what kind of sound I need. But I find that I don't adjust the kick batter too much outside of just looking for pitch. Really the only head on an entire drum set that I pretty much tune and then it always stays in the same sort of place is the snare bottom. There's kind of only, in my mind, there's really only 2 zones for a snare bottom. There's your average place that's just pretty tight, but not tabletop, and then tabletop. Tabletop gives you a lot of response, which is fun and great, but it can also, I feel like, it flattens the drum slightly or makes it sound shallower than it is. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's really just about what you need the drum to do or the sound of it. Some drums don't love having a tabletop bottom. Some drums exclusively love it, and some drums are very flexible. But pretty much once I have a drum, regardless of what I'm doing with the snare drum, I won't change the bottom. The top will be where all the money happens. And on a snare drum, we all use so much dampening and stuff to help achieve certain tones, because we've got really open snare sounds like you would have heard in the 50s, or we have really dead drum sounds like you would have heard in the 70s. So we just have to cover it all, and I tune the top to get to that. Sometimes I will break the rules and do a weird tuning where I'll just drop one lug completely down and maybe the 2 next to it bring down a little bit on a snare drum just because it gives it that thing very quickly. But generally, I'm just looking for a pitch that makes sense in the song. You know, in the case of the sample pack, we're just in a room and there's no other music. It's just you and a click track and you're just playing drums. It's weird to make musical decisions in the absence of music. In some ways, you're working on it and it kind of feels like, am I just running an exercise from a book since there's no other music happening? But it is fun in its own way to do that. It is very drum-centric, very drum-oriented. It is full tilt drums, and that's all that matters. And it leaves its own freedom in that. But it is a very different experience to do. Snare drums. That's really why we're here. Yeah, so this is everything I used on the pack, except for one, which I'll get to at the end. And so we're just gonna start here, and we'll go on a journey to here. So our first one is a leady. This is from, I'm not 100% sure, but it's late 20s, early 30s. It is from the same era that when Kahn owned Ludwig and Leedy, and they use the same shell manufacturer. So this is a 2-piece shell like you would find in a Black Beauty or other nickel over brass Ludwig drums like what I have in front of me. It's a 6.5 6-lug. I do have the original hoops for it that match the drum, but I did this as an experiment because Chad Cromwell uses a 2-piece 5x14 it's a 10-lug that he changed to die cast, and I have these Gretsch 6-lug die cast hoops on it. It's not an amazing shape. It has a really bad dent and badly drilled muffler hole. It has a bunch of extra holes over here. It has, you can't really tell, but Swiss cheese behind the throw off here. So I put this World Max S12, which is a great piston drive throw off. It's got a slightly adjustable hole spacing, so I put that on there. But my favorite part about this drum is it has this Legacy Remo head. Remo hasn't made these in a very long time. They're very dark. They're darker. I feel like they're darker than a fiber skin, but it is along those lines. And they made all kinds of weights: Ambassador, Emperor, Diplomat, pinstripes. They're really difficult to find, and I found out about them because my buddy Ken Coomer has one on this 1941 Leedy Broadway he owns, and that's the sound you hear on Wilco's Summer Teeth. And I just think it's a great snare sound. So I put that on this drum just to make it like weird and fat. I think this one, we named all the drums in this pack. I absolutely don't remember all the names because I just made them up. But I think this one was Gut Bucket or something. That I feel like that's what I always call it. So it's just got that kind of fat, beefy thing going on to it. So it's cool. And it's a natural brass. Let's see. Next on the list, we've got my Keplinger stainless steel. This is a 7-inch. Now, when we did the recording, I didn't have these wood hoops on it. I just had the standard triple flange that come on it. But a buddy of mine has an AOT Keplinger, and they have these thick wood hoops that have claws, and he said it made it sound like a completely different drum. So I put these on here, and I like the way it sounds. It gives it an insanely mean cross stick, because this is a pretty heavy drum. It's about 17 pounds, but Greg Keplinger makes some incredible drums, and I love this. You can, even though it's really heavy, you'd be really surprised at how versatile it is. So I probably was running the exact same heads, which is a Remo controlled sound on this, and then I use these Evans Orchestral 300s or Remo Renaissance snare sides. They're a little drier, a little darker, but yeah, it's just a great drum. I love the way they sound. If you've never heard of Keplinger, it's pretty much the sound that defines it was Soundgarden Super Unknown. Hopefully this won't roll away. There we go. All right, this is probably the drum I'll never get rid of. So this is a 20s. It's a 2-piece heavy brass shell. It is a 4x15 6-lug. I bought it from my buddy Aaron Hayes, and that's when I met him. He had moved here and just was like thinning his herd, and it has just some throw off. That's nothing special, but I bought this drum. I love a 15, and I love a shallow 15 especially. So at the time, just like right after this, this is when I started my stint as a drum tech, and John Aldridge was very helpful in answering a lot of my questions and stuff, and I wanted to show my appreciation to him by hiring him to engrave a drum for me, so I had him engrave this. Even though it's a Ludwig, I got the Leedy Thunderbird pattern because I just think it looks cool. It's very geometric, and he did a great job, and it just means, this drum means a lot to me. Also, because I managed the store and I chose what we ordered, and I could order myself things. When I ordered a lot of hoops in our brief period as an Angel drum dealer before they went out of business, I had them make me a set of 15-inch 6-lug hoops for this drum. And it was cool before, but now it just has like an extra special thing, and especially now that they're out of business, I'm pretty sure these are probably the only 15-inch 6-lug hoops they ever made. So it's very cool, and I'm very grateful to have them. And I've used this drum on a lot of recordings. I pretty much always run it with a fiber skin Ambassador. I just love the way it sounds on these kind of shells. And then it's a 15, so you have less options, and I just run normal Ambassador snare side with really thin wires, 12 strand, because when you get into these really old metal drums, This one is probably from, hard to say without the throw off, but this one is probably from the early 20s. Just they have crimped snare beds and they're usually very narrow. So you have to use narrow wires, which the 6.5 over here also had. I tend to use smaller wires to begin with, but you kind of have to on these. All right. This is a really fun drum that also has angel hoops. This is a Rogers Luxor, which is just their 6-lug, like their Pioneer or whatever. I got this drum from Aaron Sterling. He was very kind, and I was down there. We were doing something for the store and at his place, and he's just one of the nicest dudes. And this drum was broken, and he just said it had never spoken to him, and he's like, if you want to fix it, it's yours. So I took it home and brought it back to life, although I did just realize my little pin broke that's holding my script badge down. So, but I ordered some 14-inch 6-lug hoops from Angel because I thought that would be a fun, very vintage drum thing. And whenever they told us that they were going to close up shop and go out of business, I bought one of the sets we had, and this was the only 6-lug drum I had at the time. So I put them on here. But I love this drum. It's got the vintage character, but it's very cracking and pretty open, especially with these hoops. It just does a thing. It's a great breakbeat drum in terms of that sound. And it's just got an ambassador over a clear ambassador. Yeah, because that's what I had. And it sounded great, so I left it. Otherwise, there's not much about it. I mean, it's just a Duco finish. It's cool. I did have to pack the lugs. This is actually probably the worst drum of all the drums I've owned in terms of ringing. If I rim shotted and I put any kind of compression on the mix, I could hear the ring. It was pretty crazy. And it's only got 6 lugs. Didn't even have 10 to resonate. But I love this drum. I do use it a lot. It's very not Nashville, which is what I like about it. All right, yet another 15-inch snare drum. Yet another 4x15-inch snare drum. This is a very early leady. It's probably 1910s, the latest. It's got its little screw-on badge here, thumb rod. I put this throw off on it because someone had put 2 holes in it and it just lined up. I don't even think, oh, someone did put holes in this side too. Originally, this wouldn't have had, it would have had this little leather piece probably that went on here, and the silk and steel wires were looped through it, and then there was a stock throw off or tensioner basically that was clamped to the hoop. And that would have been the original tension situation for this. But this is solid maple with solid maple hoops. It looks like a banjo because that's how early drums are. But this is a very woody sounding drum for obvious reasons. It's very weird to tune because they're not held in a position, so you have to like make sure that they're evenly positioned as you're tensioning it up and everything. But a drum like this is what Levon Helm played basically throughout the 70s with the band. And I don't have mine set up exactly like that, but I love to have a drum like that just because it's such a classic sound. Again, I've got a Legacy head that I found that was new old stock. It's a Legacy Diplomat, and just a normal snare side with some, this one is interesting because it has particularly narrow snare beds, even more narrow than 12 strands will fit. So I just put 14-inch wires that are 16 strand. So you can see that there's some extra zone here, which makes it a little less sensitive, but it's just overall a really nice sound. And it does a thing. You know, you can do that on any drum. You could take a 14-inch drum and put 13-inch wires on it or 12-inch wires on it. It will sound different. It won't be as sensitive, but it might do the thing you need it to do a little better than you think. I'm definitely the guy who will do stuff like that because I'm bored. All right, so while I said this one is the one I would never get rid of, it's a 15 and I don't get to use it a lot sometimes because it's hard to take for backline. You know, you have to have a particular stand. 15s bring their own problem. So this drum sees the most action. I play it with all kinds of artists and it just does a thing. This is a 60s acrylite that I bought as a shell only, and it's you know, it's not in great shape, as you can see. It's got a lot of scuffs. It was worse than I thought it was. And I was trying to decide what to do with it. And I had bought this other shell that was a older 1920s Ludwig solid shell drum. And I bought these lugs for that originally, and I didn't measure it. I was like, oh, a Ludwig lug is this. And I just bought them and then realized that these are too wide. But they did fit this drum. So I don't know, I like it. I think it's kind of fugly. And then when I put it all together, you know, it just has a normal Ambassador snare side, hazy, with some 20 strands, which I'd pretty much never put on anything anymore, and a controlled sound that has a tiny hole that I don't know what happened. Something fell against the drum, but it's been like that for 4 years, and it still works and it still sounds good. I've got some snare weights on here that I like move around and do stuff, because this is pretty much the drum that I take around to in-town gigs more than anything, because it will go way up or way down. And these hoops are single flange hoops, and they're brass. The tube lugs are brass. So it just gives it this very warm, resonant quality that makes it not, and since these single flange hoops make it a little more resonant as well, so it's just not as dry as a lot of acrylites can be. I've got my Indy throw off over here, which is a great replacement, and it's quiet and doesn't fail like a P85. But yeah, this drum, I use this drum seriously all the time. Not a week goes by that it doesn't get used. It is my workhorse personally, so yeah, I had to bring it. So next we have an Ebner antique brass, I think is what they call it. When I was deciding what to bring for this pack, you know, we're Nelson, we're known for the vintage thing, but we have a lot of boutique brands, and I wanted to bring some of the brands that we carry that I owned their drums personally that we sell. So we are an Ebner dealer, we're a Keplinger dealer, so I wanted to bring some of these, just also because they have a unique sound, and it's something that there's probably not a sample of out there. There's probably one of maybe a Keplinger, but definitely not an Ebner, other than maybe another drum sample shop pack. So, because I know Payton has the same model if I'm not mistaken. But this drum, I ended up with this drum because I dropped it at the store, and I dented the rim, and there was a slight indentation at the bottom of the shell, and it was straight up my fault. And so I was like, you know what, I'm just gonna do this, and it still sounded amazing. So I used it a lot, but when we had it for the drum sample pack, I had calfskin top and bottom on it, which was a really interesting sound because this drum is fairly heavy. It has very thick brass hoops that Ebner makes, and they're probably 5mm or so, maybe slightly thicker, and they're brass. Then the shell, they also make, it's brass. They make their lugs, they're brass. So the drum itself is very heavy, which is why I dropped it. But so you get all that volume potential, and then you have these calfskin heads, top and bottom. It gave it a very vintage quality, but it also was so loud, which is just not something you encounter very often. So it was a fun thing that I was doing with it for a while, but I have more normal heads on it now because I use it on gigs because it's got a great cross stick, which is one of my favorite things. I do, you know, modern country has a lot of that cross stick thing, but I do play a lot of Americana or more traditional country, and the cross stick is very important. So, you know, these days it's just got an Emperor over an Evans Orchestral 300 with some 16-strand wires. So, but great drum, and they're great guys. So, just like Greg, I like to own drums by cool folks. And then the last one here, this is a sentimental drum. This is also the drum that's probably the closest to what would have been likely to be heard on a 50s thing, even though it is a 60s drum technically. But this is a Ludwig. It is an LM400, but this would have been called a Super Ludwig. It is before the Supraphonic. It is the Super Ludwig before the Supraphonic. So this is a brass shell. It is not seamless, there is a seam, and it has crimped snare beds, which, oh yeah, I've got this head, you won't be able to see. But crimped snare beds are deeper than a modern snare bed. A lot of vintage drums will, if they're metal, they will exclusively pretty much have crimped beds. If they're wooden, they may have deeper beds. And that just gives a very dry snare response out of the gate. And it makes for a very unique sound. And these drums record really well for that reason. You see most, the really sought after ones are the transition badge, which would have been 1959 to 1960. This is somewhere 61 to 63. I got it from a guy. I'm from North Georgia in this now town that's not as small, but when I grew up there, it was quite small. And I have a pretty large radius set on my Facebook marketplace. And this guy in the town was selling this drum. And it was a pretty good deal. It needed, it wasn't completely original. And I asked my dad if he'd go pick it up from the guy. And he did. And he was late as usual. And the guy was freaking out and thought I was trying to like scam him or waste his time. And that was not fun, but my dad picked it up and he was like, yeah, everything looks fine, even though my dad doesn't play drums and he would have really no idea. He just knew it didn't have like a big hole in it or anything. But he wouldn't let me pay him for it. I tried to give him the money and he just wouldn't take it. So it's one of the last gifts my dad ever gave me outside of a Christmas, the last Christmas of that year. So I the top hoop was not original. This would have had chrome over brass hoops as well, so now it does have chrome over brass top and bottom. It's a great drum. It does tend to love to be tuned a little higher than lower, but it's still just a really, really well-rounded drum. It did also have some pretty ringy, lugs, so I stuffed all those. But otherwise, it just looks like a 60 Supraphonic. It will be heavier, about double the weight almost of a standard Supraphonic, and it's going to be a lot louder. So this is a really cool drum, and just it has that like cracking thing. So yeah. Now the one drum that's not here, I had a 1970s Ludwig combo snare, which is plastic. It's a plastic shell. Mine is a mongrel. It has the incorrect lugs and some other stuff on it, but it has a sound that's very specific. It's kind of dry. It doesn't have a lot of top end. It doesn't sound quite like a toy, but it's definitely a thing. So imagine it were here. Imagine I'm holding it. It's a textured black finish, which is also very strange, and it's all molded. So it has molded edges, and it just has hardware that just mounts directly to it. And it would have used normal flat-backed kind of jazz festival lugs originally, or the Ludwig standard lugs. I've seen them with both, and a P85 and just some hoops, and it has a very strange sound. There's not much else to it. I don't even think mine ever had a muffler, but it's a weird drum, but it's fun. As in terms of the cymbals in the pack, I played some Black Label Peisty 2002s, because those are the only vintage cymbals I own. And I was told they were the first Peisties ever featured in a drum sample shop pack. Be still my heart. But I have that set because it is the early set that Jeff Porcaro played. It's 14-inch heavy hats. It's an 18-inch just crash, a 20-inch crash, and a 22 ride. They have enough patina on them that they're not quite as glassy as a new set would be. They also have slightly different profiles and weights compared to a modern 2002. But I just love a super tight pair of hi-hats. And if you put some pressure on those and you do the tip of the stick, it is just that classic tick. And that's what I want a lot of the time. And then the ride just felt right when I listened to that playlist of all those songs. The rides had a lot of clarity, so I felt like that would be a good one for me to bring. And the cymbals the crashes are just big, very even crashes. They're surprisingly well-rounded, and you can play them I think they get a rap of kind of being rock cymbals, but you could really do a very dynamic gig on them. The volume 4 is pretty low, so you maybe couldn't do like a brunch gig with them, but you could do a jazz gig and it'd be fine, which is kind of crazy. So I use those cymbals a lot, especially for recording. I don't really take them on the road, but they're great cymbals, and I didn't think I'd love them as much as I did. So There's also a 27-inch Wuhan China, which is large, very large, has a note length 3 miles long. And we did a couple things with that, and it's weird, certainly weird. Doesn't get a lot of use, but it's a fun conversation piece. So that's what I brought, and that's what I played. And that's what you can have if you get the sample pack. Well, hopefully you learned something about drums today and what I brought. And we had a fun time making this pack, and if it sounds like something you'd be interested in, you can snag it over at Drum Sample Shop. They're great guys. They helped facilitate all this. It was their brainchild. Peyton came to me and we had lunch over a delicious hamburger and discussed what this might look like, and then pitched it to Bryson and went from there. And it was a lot of fun to make. Great to meet Johnny and honestly watch him work his magic so rapidly as these drums are being pushed in, pushed out, you know, resetting mics, just getting it all done and making sure it's all dialed and doing it insanely quickly. It was, I mean, it was a busy couple days. And so they did a great job, and I mean, any of the other packs are also, I'm sure, exactly the same kind of process in their own form, but every one of them that I've heard sounds great in its own way too, because that's the fun thing. You get the flavor of each little pack, just like you get this pack you get 3 or 4 flavors, because you've got Bryson's kits and one of mine and one of Joseph's and our individual playing styles, which is fun. So yeah, check it out. Grab it on their shop, and if you're ever in Nashville, come see us. You can see the mighty snare wall and, you know, hit some stuff. Drums, it was good to see you, but I got stuff to sweep.